Why would a grieving teenager stake everything on a black stallion the whole town feared to touch? In the rain-soaked hills of Willow Creek, Oregon, Lily Donovan defied whispers of curses and tragedy when she reached for a horse everyone else had abandoned. What happened next in that old red barn would silence the doubters and rewrite both their futures in ways no one saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The spring rain fell steady and cold across the metal roof of the livestock auction barn, each drop drumming a relentless rhythm that seemed to match the beating of anxious hearts inside. The air was thick with the smell of wet hay, manure, and the nervous sweat of animals packed too close together. Wooden pens lined both sides of the central walkway, filled with cattle, goats, and horses awaiting their turn under the auctioneer's gavel. People huddled in their rain jackets, boots caked with mud from the parking lot, their voices rising and falling in a constant murmur of speculation and negotiation. This was sale day in Willow Creek, the kind of event that drew farmers and ranchers from 3 counties over. Some came looking for breeding stock. Others came hoping to offload animals they could no longer afford to feed. A few came simply for the spectacle, the way people gather at any public display of fortune and misfortune colliding. In the far corner pen, separated from the rest by an extra panel of fencing, stood a horse that drew more stares than any other animal in the building. He was a black stallion, sleek and powerful, with a coat so dark it seemed to absorb the dim light filtering through the high windows. A white star marked his forehead, stark against the midnight of his face, like a beacon or a warning depending on who looked at it. His eyes were wild, rolling white at the edges whenever anyone approached the fence. His nostrils flared with each breath, steam rising in the cool air, and his hooves struck the ground in sharp, impatient bursts that sent tremors through the wooden planks. The murmurs around his pen were different from those elsewhere in the barn. These were not voices weighing value or considering purchase. These were voices thick with superstition and fear. That's the Caldwell horse, the one that put Jimmy Haskell in the hospital. Heard his back was broken in 3 places. 6 months of recovery and he still walks with a cane. Cursed that one. Bad luck follows him like a shadow. My uncle said horses like that carry death in their eyes. Best to put them down before they hurt someone else. The stallion stamped again, harder this time, and several people stepped back from the fence. No one reached out to touch him. No one spoke gently to calm him. He stood alone in his pen, powerful and furious and utterly isolated, as though an invisible circle had been drawn around him that no sane person would dare to cross. Lily Donovan stood at the edge of that circle, arms wrapped around herself against the cold seeping through her worn denim jacket. At 16, she was small for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid and eyes that carried shadows far older than her years. She had arrived at the auction with her grandmother an hour earlier, not because they had money to spend, but because Grace Donovan had insisted they needed to see what livestock prices were running these days. It was the kind of errand meant to fill empty hours, to give purpose to a day that might otherwise be swallowed by the quiet grief that lived in their small farmhouse. But Lily had stopped walking the moment she saw the black stallion. Something in the way he moved, the wild desperation in his eyes, the isolation that surrounded him, spoke to a place deep inside her chest that she usually kept locked tight. She knew what it felt like to be circled by fear and pity, to have people whisper and step away, to be marked by tragedy as though it were a contagious disease. 2 years ago, on a rain-slicked highway not far from this very barn, Lily's parents had died in a car accident. She had been in the back seat. She had survived without a scratch. They had not. The town had surrounded her with casseroles and condolences, but beneath the kindness she felt the weight of their unspoken questions. Why her? Why did she survive when they did not? And in the silence of her grandmother's house, Lily asked herself the same question every night until the guilt became a second skin she could not shed. Now she stood staring at a horse the town had also marked for death, and she felt a recognition so fierce it stole her breath. Grace appeared beside her, moving slowly with the careful steps of a woman whose bones ached in the damp weather. She was 73, with silver hair pinned beneath a wool cap and a face lined by decades of hard work and harder losses. She followed Lily's gaze to the stallion and sighed quietly. That's Phantom. Used to belong to the Caldwell Ranch. Lily glanced at her grandmother. What happened to him? Grace's expression darkened. Threw a rider last summer during a training session. Boy named Jimmy Haskell. Broke his back in 2 places and cracked 3 ribs. Spent months in the hospital. Folks said the horse went mad, bucking and kicking until they could barely get him under control. After that, Caldwell wanted nothing to do with him. Called him cursed. Said he brought bad luck to anyone who touched him. Lily looked back at the stallion. He was pacing now, his muscles coiled tight beneath that gleaming black coat, his head tossing as though trying to shake off invisible restraints. Is it true? Is he cursed? Grace was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying the horse with the careful assessment of someone who had spent a lifetime around animals. Horses don't carry curses, child. They carry pain. Something happened to him, something that taught him people mean harm. Now he fights before anyone can hurt him first. The words settled over Lily like a second skin. She understood that logic. She understood the instinct to push away before being left behind. She had done it herself, withdrawing from friends who no longer knew how to talk to her, avoiding places that held too many memories, building walls so high that even her grandmother sometimes could not reach her. The auctioneer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing the next lot. The crowd began to shift, moving toward the main ring, but a cluster of men remained near Phantom's pen. Lily recognized one of them immediately, Mr. Caldwell. He was a broad man in his 50s, with a clean Stetson and boots polished despite the mud outside. He owned the largest ranch in the county, a sprawling empire of cattle and horses that made him both wealthy and influential. Beside him stood his daughter Rebecca, a girl Lily's age who had once been her closest friend before the accident created a distance neither of them knew how to cross. Caldwell was speaking to the auctioneer, his voice loud enough to carry. Just get rid of him. I don't care what he brings. I won't have that animal on my property another day. He's dangerous, unpredictable, and frankly, I'm doing this county a favor by not putting a bullet in him myself. The auctioneer nodded, clearly uncomfortable. We'll do our best, Mr. Caldwell, but you know how people are about a horse with a reputation. Then sell him for slaughter. At least he'll be worth something as dog food. The words hit Lily like a physical blow. She looked at Phantom, saw the way his ears flicked back at the sound of Caldwell's voice, saw the way his entire body tensed as though bracing for an attack. He knew. Somehow, he knew what was being said about him. Grace's hand found Lily's shoulder, a gentle weight meant to anchor her. Don't think about it, sweetheart. That horse is beyond help. But Lily could not look away. She thought about the past 2 years, about the nights she had lain awake wishing someone would see past her guilt and grief to the person she used to be. She thought about the loneliness of being marked as broken, as dangerous, as something to be whispered about and avoided. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And she thought about how no one had been able to reach her until she decided to let them. The bidding began with cruel laughter. The auctioneer's voice rang out over the crowd. All right, folks, we've got lot 17 here, a black stallion, 4 years old, formerly of Caldwell Ranch. Let's start the bidding at $500. Silence. No hands raised. No voices called out. The crowd watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort, as though witnessing something they knew was wrong but lacked the courage to stop. All right, let's try 300. Still nothing. A few people chuckled. Someone muttered that even 300 was too much for a killer horse. The auctioneer sighed. $100 then. Surely someone can use him for something. Lily felt her grandmother's hand tighten on her shoulder, a silent plea not to do what she could already feel building inside her chest. But the weight of recognition was too strong, the pull of shared isolation too powerful to resist. Before she fully understood what she was doing, Lily's hand shot into the air. $100. The barn fell silent. Every head turned toward her. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. The girl in the back? You're bidding 100? Lily's voice shook, but she forced it louder. Yes, $100. Caldwell turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. His expression shifted from surprise to something colder, something that looked almost like pity mixed with disdain. He leaned toward the auctioneer and said something too low for Lily to hear, but the auctioneer's face flushed and he looked back at her with clear doubt. Miss, are you aware of this horse's history? He's considered dangerous, unpredictable, not suitable for inexperienced handlers. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to lower her hand, to walk away, to let someone else make this choice. But then she looked at Phantom again, saw the way he stood trembling with barely contained energy, saw the star on his forehead blazing white like a mark of defiance, and she knew she could not abandon him any more than she could abandon herself. I know his history, and I'm still bidding. Grace's voice was low and urgent beside her. Lily, we don't have the money. We can barely afford feed for the chickens. And even if we could, that horse could hurt you, could kill you. Lily turned to her grandmother, and for the first time in 2 years, her voice carried not guilt or grief, but something fiercer, something that felt almost like hope. Maybe he could. Or maybe he just needs someone to see him as more than his worst moment. The words hung in the damp air of the barn, and Grace's eyes filled with sudden tears. She looked at her granddaughter for a long moment, seeing not the broken child who had moved into her house 2 years ago, but the girl who had existed before the accident. The girl who had always championed the underdog, who had brought home injured birds and stray cats, who had believed with stubborn certainty that nothing was beyond saving. Grace's hand slipped from Lily's shoulder, and though her voice trembled, she did not stop her. The money's in the truck. In the glove box. Emergency fund. Not much, but it's there if you're certain. Lily's throat tightened. I'm certain. The auctioneer looked from Lily to Caldwell, clearly hoping someone else would step in and make this easier. But no other hands rose. No other voices called out. Finally, he lifted his gavel. Going once at $100. Going twice. His eyes swept the crowd one last time, found only silence, and brought the gavel down with a sharp crack that echoed through the barn. Sold to the young lady in the back for $100. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others laughed outright, already placing bets on how long it would take before the horse put the girl in the hospital too. Caldwell's expression had gone cold and hard, his jaw clenched tight, but he said nothing as he turned and walked away, Rebecca hurrying after him with a backward glance at Lily that carried something unreadable. Lily stood frozen, her hands still raised, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. What had she just done? She had no experience with horses beyond a few riding lessons as a child. She had no money, no equipment, no plan beyond the overwhelming certainty that she could not let this animal die alone and afraid. Grace moved beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Well then, I suppose we'd better go get your horse. They walked together through the parting crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers, until they reached Phantom's pen. Up close, he was even more magnificent and terrifying than he had seemed from a distance. He towered over them, his black coat rippling with muscle, his eyes rolling white as they approached. A ranch hand stood nearby with a lead rope, clearly reluctant to enter the pen. You really want him, miss? The man's voice was skeptical. Because I'm not responsible if he tramples you. Lily swallowed hard. I want him. The ranch hand shook his head but unlatched the gate. He moved carefully, speaking in low tones as he approached the stallion. Phantom's ears pinned flat against his skull. His lips pulled back, showing teeth. The man froze, then tried again, but Phantom lunged forward, teeth snapping, and the man stumbled backward with a curse. Forget it. You can load him yourself. I'm not getting killed for $100. He tossed the lead rope over the fence and walked away, leaving Lily and Grace standing at the gate with the furious stallion inside. The crowd that had been dispersing now paused to watch, sensing drama. Someone shouted that they should call animal control before the horse killed someone. Lily's hands shook as she picked up the lead rope. Every rational part Of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she should walk away, that some things were too broken to fix. But she thought about the past 2 years, about all the people who had looked at her with that same mixture of fear and pity, who had decided she was too damaged to reach. And she thought about how desperately she had wanted just one person to try anyway. She opened the gate and stepped inside. Grace gasped. "Lily, no." But Lily did not stop. She moved slowly, the lead rope held loosely in one hand. Her eyes fixed not on Phantom's teeth or hooves but on his eyes. She saw the fear there, the rage born from pain, the desperate loneliness of an animal that had learned the world meant only harm. She stopped 3 feet away from him and did something no one expected. She knelt in the dirt and mud of the pen, making herself small, making herself vulnerable. She lowered her gaze and held out one empty hand, palm up, offering nothing but presence. The barn went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Phantom stamped his hoof, sending mud spattering across her jacket. His breath came hard and fast, clouds of steam in the cold air. He tossed his head, muscles coiled to strike or flee. But Lily did not move. She stayed kneeling in the mud, hand extended, and she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're scared. I know everyone has hurt you or left you or decided you're not worth the trouble. I know what it feels like to be the one everyone whispers about, the one they think is cursed. But I see you. Not what happened. Not what they say about you. I see you." The words were as much for herself as for the horse. They were the words she had needed to hear for 2 years, the words no one had known how to say. And as she spoke them, something shifted in the air of that pen. Phantom's ears flicked forward. His head lowered slightly. His eyes, still wild but no longer quite so white with panic, fixed on the small figure kneeling before him. Slowly, impossibly, the stallion took 1 step forward. Then another. The crowd held its breath. Grace's hand covered her mouth, and Lily remained perfectly still, heart hammering, as Phantom stretched his neck forward until his muzzle was inches from her outstretched hand. For a moment, nothing existed but the girl and the horse and the fragile space between reaching and touching. Then Phantom's soft nose brushed against her palm, and Lily felt tears spill down her cheeks as something inside her chest that had been locked tight for 2 years finally, impossibly, began to open. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Lily led Phantom out of the auction barn and into the gray afternoon light. The loading area was a chaos of trucks and trailers, ranchers shouting directions to hired hands, animals protesting as they were coaxed up metal ramps. Grace had brought their old pickup truck around, hitched to a borrowed horse trailer that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, one of the rear lights was cracked, and the whole thing swayed slightly on worn suspension. Lily stood at the trailer's open gate, lead rope in hand, Phantom beside her. The stallion's muscles were tense beneath his gleaming black coat, his eyes taking in everything with the wariness of an animal expecting ambush. His breathing was rapid, nostrils flaring with each exhale that sent steam into the cool air. She could feel the tremor running through him, the barely contained energy of a creature ready to bolt or fight at the slightest provocation. Several ranch hands had gathered at a distance, arms crossed, watching with the morbid curiosity of spectators at a potential disaster. One of them called out, "You need help loading him, miss? Though I'll warn you, it took 6 men and a tranquilizer to get him in a trailer last time." Lily's throat tightened. She glanced at Grace, who stood by the truck's cab with her hand on the door handle, ready to climb in or come running depending on what happened next. Her grandmother's face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line of worry, but she said nothing. This was Lily's choice, and Grace had learned long ago that some lessons could only be taught through experience. Lily turned back to Phantom. The trailer loomed before them, its dark interior probably looking like a trap to the stallion. She thought about forcing him, about using the techniques she had seen other handlers employ, pressure and dominance and the insistence that the human will must prevail. But something in her gut told her that approach would shatter whatever fragile connection had formed between them in that muddy pen. Instead, she did something that made the watching ranch hands shake their heads in disbelief. She walked up the trailer ramp herself, the metal clanging under her boots, and she sat down inside near the front, cross-legged on the rubber mat. The lead rope stretched between her and Phantom, who stood frozen at the base of the ramp, head high, eyes showing white. "I'm not going to make you," Lily said quietly, her voice nearly lost in the sound of rain pattering on metal. "I'm just going to sit here and wait. You can come when you're ready, or not at all, but I'll wait either way." The ranch hands muttered among themselves. One laughed outright. "She's going to be sitting there till Christmas." Grace moved closer, her boots squelching in the mud. "Lily, sweetheart, we can't wait all day. It's getting dark, and that trailer needs to be back to the Hendersons by evening." But Lily didn't move. She sat in the dim interior of the trailer, the lead rope loose in her hands, and she kept her eyes on Phantom. The stallion paced at the bottom of the ramp, head tossing, hooves striking the ground with sharp cracks. He circled once, twice, testing the perimeter, looking for escape routes. But each time he completed a circle, his gaze returned to the girl sitting patiently in the trailer. Minutes passed. The ranch hands grew bored and wandered away. The drizzle turned back to proper rain, drumming on the trailer roof with increasing intensity. Grace climbed into the truck cab to escape the weather, but she left the door open, watching through the rearview mirror. Phantom's pacing slowed, his head lowered fractionally. He approached the ramp, sniffed at the metal, then backed away sharply as if it had burned him. Lily remained motionless. She thought about the months after her parents' funeral, about how people had tried to coax her back into normal life with invitations and activities and well-meaning advice. How none of it had worked because they were trying to pull her forward before she was ready to move. How the only thing that had eventually helped was her grandmother simply being present, day after day, asking nothing, offering everything. The stallion approached the ramp again. This time he placed one hoof on the metal, testing its solidity. The ramp groaned under his weight. He pulled back, snorted, then tried again. One hoof, then two. He stood half on the ramp, half off, trembling with the effort of fighting every instinct that screamed danger. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her breathing slow and steady. "That's it," she whispered. "Just one step at a time. No rush. We have all day if you need it." Phantom's ears swiveled toward her voice. Another hoof lifted, placed higher on the ramp. Then another. He was halfway up now, his massive body filling the width of the ramp, his head nearly level with where Lily sat. She could see every detail of his face now, the intelligence in those dark eyes, the scars around his muzzle from a bit that had been used too harshly, the way his nostrils flared with each careful breath. One more step, then another, and then, impossibly, he was inside the trailer. His body filled the space, his head just inches from the roof. The trailer swayed under his weight, metal groaning. He stood frozen, every muscle locked, his breathing rapid and panicked. Lily slowly rose to her feet, moving with deliberate care so as not to startle him. She reached up, very gently, and placed her hand against his neck. His coat was damp with rain and sweat, warm beneath her palm. She felt the rapid thud of his heartbeat, the tremor that ran through his entire frame. "You did it," she said softly. "You're so brave, so incredibly brave." For a moment they stood together in the dim trailer, girl and horse, both trembling, both terrified, both having crossed a threshold into unknown territory. Then Lily backed toward the front of the trailer, leading Phantom the final few steps until he was fully inside. She secured him with practiced movements she didn't know she possessed, her hands remembering skills from childhood riding lessons she thought she had forgotten. When she jumped down from the trailer and swung the gate closed, the sound of metal latching felt like the seal on a promise. Grace was out of the truck in an instant, pulling Lily into a fierce embrace that smelled of lavender soap and rain. "I thought my heart was going to stop," Grace said, her voice shaking. "I thought for certain he would bolt and drag you with him or trample you or worse." Lily's legs felt suddenly weak, the adrenaline that had sustained her draining away all at once. She leaned into her grandmother's embrace, feeling like a child again. "I was scared too. I'm still scared. What have I done, Grandma? I don't know how to handle a horse like him. I don't know what I'm doing." Grace pulled back, her hands framing Lily's face, her eyes fierce despite the tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "You trusted your instincts. You showed compassion when everyone else showed fear. That's not nothing, child. That's everything." The drive back to the Donovan farm took 20 minutes along winding rural roads, the trailer swaying behind them, the rain coming down in sheets that made the windshield wipers work overtime. Grace drove slowly, mindful of the precious cargo behind them. Lily sat twisted in her seat, watching through the truck's rear window, trying to see into the trailer's dark interior, wondering if Phantom was terrified or if the motion and sound of travel had numbed him into stillness. The Donovan property appeared through the rain like a faded photograph. 15 acres of pasture and woodland, a small farmhouse with peeling white paint, a chicken coop that leaned slightly to one side, and the old red barn that had been there longer than anyone could remember. It wasn't much compared to the sprawling Caldwell Ranch with its pristine white fences and climate-controlled stables. But it was home, and it had been for 3 generations of Donovans. Grace backed the trailer up to the barn with practiced ease, the tires squelching in mud, the barn door already standing open in preparation. The barn's interior was dim and smelled of old hay and dust, but it was dry and relatively warm. They had prepared a large stall at the far end, cleaned and bedded with fresh straw that morning when this had still been a vague possibility rather than a reality. Unloading proved easier than loading had been. When Lily opened the trailer gate, Phantom practically lunged out, his hooves clattering on the ramp, his relief at being free of the confined space palpable. But instead of bolting into the rain, he stopped just outside the trailer, sides heaving, head raised to take in his new surroundings. Lily kept hold of the lead rope, her hands steady despite the stallion's size and power. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you out of this rain." She led him toward the barn, and after a moment's hesitation, Phantom followed. His hooves echoed on the old wooden floor as they entered, and his ears swiveled in all directions, cataloging every sound and shadow. But he didn't fight her. He walked beside her, tense but trusting, until they reached the prepared stall. Lily opened the stall door and unclipped the lead rope, stepping back quickly to give Phantom space. The stallion moved into the stall, circled it once, sniffing at the corners and pawing at the fresh straw. Then he turned to face the door, his body still coiled with tension but no longer radiating panic. Grace appeared with an armful of hay, which she tossed over the stall door. "He'll need water too. There's a bucket by the pump." Lily fetched water while Grace measured out grain, both of them moving around the horse with careful deliberation, speaking in low voices, trying to establish a routine that might help Phantom understand he was safe here. The stallion watched their every movement but made no aggressive moves. He ate the hay with quick, almost desperate bites, as if fearing it might be taken away. He drank deeply from the water bucket, his throat working with great gulps. When there was nothing left to do but leave him to settle, Lily found herself reluctant to go. She stood at the stall door, one hand resting on the rough wood, watching the black stallion in the dim light. Phantom stood with his head lowered now, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The white star on his forehead seemed to glow in the darkness, a beacon in the shadows. "Get some rest," Lily whispered. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As if in response, Phantom's ears flicked toward her voice, and for just a moment, his eyes softened. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. A beginning. Grace was waiting by the barn door, a lantern in her hand casting golden light across her tired face. Together they walked through the rain to the farmhouse, their boots heavy with mud, their clothes soaked through. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of the stew that had been simmering in the slow cooker all day. Grace ladled out 2 bowls while Lily peeled off her wet jacket and hung it by the door. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the rain hammering on the roof. Finally, Grace set down her spoon and looked at her granddaughter with an expression that was equal parts worry and pride. "You know this won't be easy. That horse has been through trauma. He doesn't trust people and he has every reason not to. It's going to take time, patience, and work. More than you might be ready for. Lily nodded, swallowing hard. I know. And people will talk. They already are. Caldwell won't like that you took his cast off. He's a proud man, and having a teenage girl succeed where he failed, well, that won't sit well with him. I know that too. Grace reached across the table and took Lily's hand. Then why? Why take this on when you're still carrying your own grief? When we barely have enough to feed ourselves, let alone a horse that size. Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her bowl. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Because when I looked at him, I saw myself. Everyone looking at him like he's broken beyond repair. Like he's dangerous. Like the kindest thing would be to put him down and forget he ever existed. And I thought about how many times over the past 2 years I felt the same way. Like maybe it would be easier if I had died in that car instead of Mom and Dad. Like maybe I'm too broken to fix. Grace's grip on her hand tightened, her eyes filling with tears. But then I thought, Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. What if someone had looked at me the way I looked at him? What if someone had seen past the grief and the guilt and the fear to the person underneath who's still fighting to survive? Maybe that would have made a difference. Maybe it still can, for both of us. Grace stood and came around the table, pulling Lily into her arms. They held each other in the warm kitchen while the rain poured down outside and somewhere in the red barn. A black stallion with a white star stood in the darkness, beginning to understand that perhaps, just perhaps, not all humans meant harm. That night, Lily lay in her bed unable to sleep, listening to the rain and thinking about the day's events. Her room was small, tucked under the eaves of the old farmhouse, with slanted ceilings and a window that looked out toward the barn. She had decorated it when she first moved in with her grandmother, trying to make it feel like home, but it still held an air of temporariness, as if she hadn't quite committed to staying. On her dresser sat a photograph of her parents, taken at the coast the summer before the accident. They were laughing, arms around each other, the wind whipping her mother's hair across her face. Lily picked up the photograph now, running her thumb across the glass. I did something today, she whispered to their smiling faces. Something scary and probably stupid, but it felt right. It felt like maybe I can be brave again, like I used to be before I lost you. The photograph offered no answers, but holding it made her feel less alone. She set it back on the dresser and climbed into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Through the window, she could just make out the dark shape of the barn against the slightly lighter sky. Somewhere in that darkness, Phantom stood in his stall, probably as sleepless as she was, wondering what his future held. Lily closed her eyes and made a silent promise to the stallion and to herself. She would not give up. She would not let fear win. Whatever it took, however long it required, she would prove that broken things could heal, that cursed things could be blessed, that endings could become beginnings if someone was brave enough to believe. The rain continued through the night, washing the world clean, preparing it for whatever morning would bring. Morning arrived with hesitant sunlight breaking through the clouds, painting the wet landscape in shades of gold and green. Lily woke before dawn, her body responding to an internal alarm she hadn't set. She dressed quickly in jeans and an old sweater, pulled her hair back, and crept downstairs trying not to wake Grace. But her grandmother was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a thermos. Figured you'd be up early, Grace said, handing her the thermos along with a paper bag. There's biscuits and jam in there. You'll need your strength. Lily accepted both gratefully, surprised by how hungry she felt. The nervous energy of yesterday had prevented her from eating much, but this morning her stomach growled with genuine appetite. She ate one biscuit standing at the counter, the sweetness of the jam cutting through her anxiety. What's your plan? Grace asked, settling into a kitchen chair with her own cup of coffee. Lily swallowed, considering the question. The truth was she didn't have much of a plan beyond surviving each moment as it came. I thought I'd start by just being there, letting him get used to my presence. Maybe clean his stall, bring him food and water. Nothing that would make him feel threatened. Grace nodded slowly. That's wise. Patience is the only currency that matters with a frightened animal. But Lily, you need to be careful. He's powerful, and if he panics, you could get hurt badly. I know. Do you? Grace's voice was sharper than usual. Because knowing it in your head and understanding it in your bones are two different things. I've seen horses kill people, sweetheart. Good horses, trained horses. A horse like Phantom, one that's been traumatized and has learned to fight back. He's even more dangerous. Lily met her grandmother's eyes. Are you saying I shouldn't do this? Grace was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. No, I'm saying you should do it with your eyes open. Don't let your heart override your common sense. And if at any point you feel unsafe, you walk away. Promise me. I promise. The barn was cool and dim when Lily entered, the early morning light filtering through gaps in the old wood siding. The familiar smell of hay and animals wrapped around her like a comfort. She could hear the soft clucking of chickens from their coop attached to the side of the barn, and somewhere in the rafters, a barn owl hooted before settling into sleep. Phantom's stall was at the far end. As Lily approached, she could see him standing with his head toward the back corner, his black coat barely distinguishable in the shadows. He didn't turn as she approached, but his ears swiveled back, tracking her movement. Good morning, Lily said softly, stopping several feet from the stall door. I brought you breakfast. She had prepared a bucket of grain mixed with molasses, something Grace had suggested to make it more appealing. She also carried fresh hay and had already filled a clean water bucket. But she didn't enter the stall immediately. Instead, she set everything down outside the door and simply stood there, giving Phantom time to acknowledge her presence on his own terms. Minutes passed. The stallion remained facing away, though his tail swished once, twice, betraying his awareness of her. Lily leaned against the wall, sipping her coffee from the thermos, content to wait. She thought about what Grace had said about patience being currency. In a world that demanded instant results and constant progress, there was something radical about simply being still. Finally, Phantom turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His dark eyes regarded her with wary intelligence. Lily kept her posture relaxed, non-threatening. She took another sip of coffee, deliberately breaking eye contact to show she wasn't challenging him. No pressure, she said quietly. I'm just here, that's all. The stallion turned fully, his massive body shifting in the straw. He approached the stall door slowly, each step deliberate. His neck extended so he could investigate the bucket of grain without getting too close to Lily. His nostrils flared as he caught the scent of molasses, and despite his wariness, his stomach clearly had opinions. He stretched his neck further, lips working at the edge of the bucket. Lily remained perfectly still as Phantom ate, his movements quick and nervous, as if he expected the food to be snatched away at any moment. She recognized that kind of hunger, the kind that came not just from an empty stomach but from a deeper deprivation. After her parents died, she had gone through phases where she barely ate, where food seemed irrelevant to the hollowness inside her. It had taken months before she could enjoy a meal again without feeling guilty for experiencing pleasure. When Phantom had finished the grain, licking the bucket clean, he raised his head and looked at Lily directly for the first time. They stood there, girl and horse, measuring each other across the barrier of the stall door. Lily could see the scars more clearly now in the morning light, marks around his mouth and neck that spoke of rough handling. She wondered what his life had been like before the incident that had labeled him cursed. Had he been treated well? Had there been someone who cared for him? Or had he always been just another asset, valuable only for what he could provide? I'm going to clean your stall now, Lily announced, her voice gentle. I'll need to come in there with you. Is that okay? Phantom snorted but didn't retreat. Lily took that as permission. She opened the stall door slowly, giving him plenty of time to move away if he wanted. The stallion backed up a few steps, watching her intently, his body tense. Lily entered with a pitchfork and began mucking out the soiled straw, working in the corner farthest from Phantom, keeping her movements slow and predictable. The work was physical and grounding. Each forkful of dirty straw removed, each clean patch revealed beneath, felt like progress. Lily fell into a rhythm, her muscles remembering this kind of labor from childhood summers spent helping her father with various farm projects. Those memories hurt, but they also felt precious, like photographs she could hold in her mind. Phantom watched her work with obvious confusion. His ears flicked forward and back, his head tilting slightly, as if trying to understand why this human was cleaning his space rather than demanding something from him. Gradually, his tension eased. His weight shifted to one hip in a more relaxed stance. When Lily moved to the middle of the stall, Phantom shifted to the side rather than pinning his ears or threatening. "Good boy," Lily murmured. "See? Nothing scary happening here. Just boring chores." She spread fresh straw, tossed in the new hay, and filled the water bucket, all while maintaining that same calm, unhurried energy. By the time she finished, almost an hour had passed, and Phantom had relaxed enough to start investigating the new hay, pulling at it with his teeth. Lily left the stall, closing the door behind her, and leaned against it with a deep exhale. Her arms ached, her back was sore, and she was sweating despite the cool morning air. But she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Useful, present, like she was exactly where she needed to be. The sound of a vehicle approaching pulled her from her thoughts. She walked to the barn entrance and saw a familiar truck coming up the muddy drive. Her stomach dropped. It was Rebecca Caldwell's vehicle, the sleek blue pickup that stood out like a jewel against the worn landscape of the Donovan farm. Rebecca parked near the house and climbed out, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her boots spotless despite the mud. She wore designer jeans and a jacket that probably cost more than Lily's entire wardrobe. They had been best friends once, back in middle school, before the accident had created a chasm between them that neither had known how to bridge. "Lily," Rebecca called out, approaching the barn. "I heard what happened at the auction yesterday. I had to come see for myself." Lily stepped out of the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans. "What do you want, Rebecca?" Rebecca stopped a few feet away, her expression uncertain. Up close, Lily could see the conflict in her former friend's eyes, something between concern and discomfort. "My dad is furious. He thinks you did it to embarrass him." "I did it to save a horse. A dangerous horse. A horse that put someone in the hospital. A traumatized horse that your father gave up on." Rebecca flinched at the accusation. "That's not fair. You don't know what happened. You weren't there when Phantom went crazy. Jimmy could have died, Lily. The doctors said he was lucky to survive." "And I'm sorry that happened," Lily said, and she meant it. But punishing Phantom for reacting to whatever triggered him doesn't solve anything. It just adds more trauma on top of trauma. "So what? You think you can fix him?" Rebecca's tone carried skepticism mixed with something else, something that might have been envy. "You think you're some kind of horse whisperer now?" "I think I'm someone who refuses to give up on something just because it's difficult." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Rebecca's face flushed, and Lily realized too late how her statement might have sounded, as if she were comparing Rebecca to those who had given up. But wasn't that true in a way? After the accident, after the funeral, Rebecca had stopped calling. She had stopped coming by. Their friendship had withered not from malice but from discomfort, from not knowing what to say to someone drowning in grief. "I didn't come here to fight," Rebecca said finally, her voice softer. "I came to warn you. My dad is talking about reporting you to animal control, saying you're keeping a dangerous animal without proper facilities or training. He could make things very difficult for you." Lily's stomach clenched. "This is proper facilities. We have a barn, pasture, everything he needs." "You know that's not what I mean. My dad has connections. He sits on the county board. If he pushes, he could have Phantom taken away from you, maybe even put down." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lily felt anger rising in her chest, hot and righteous. "Why are you telling me this? To scare me into giving up?" "No." Rebecca looked genuinely distressed now. "I'm telling you because despite everything, despite the fact that we haven't talked in forever, I still care about you. And I remember what you used to be like before. You always stood up for the underdog. You never backed down when you thought something was wrong. I guess I want to see if that person is still in there. The admission caught Lily off guard. She stared at Rebecca, seeing past the perfect exterior to the uncertainty beneath. Why does it matter to you? Rebecca looked away, her jaw working. Because I miss my friend. Because I've spent 2 years not knowing what to say to you. Feeling guilty every time I saw you at school. Wanting to reach out but being too scared I'd say the wrong thing. And now you've done this incredibly brave, incredibly stupid thing, and it reminded me of why we were friends in the first place. Lily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. You could have just talked to me. Anytime. I was the one who lost my parents, but you acted like I died too. I know. Rebecca's voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry. I was a coward. I am a coward. I'm still scared of saying the wrong thing, of making it worse. But watching you yesterday at the auction, watching you refuse to let everyone's fear become your fear, it made me realize that being scared is no excuse for abandoning someone. The two girls stood in the muddy driveway, years of hurt and misunderstanding between them, and for the first time since the accident, Lily felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. The understanding that people were complicated, that they made mistakes, that sometimes the brave thing wasn't grand gestures but simply showing up and admitting fault. I don't know if we can be friends again, Lily said honestly. Too much has changed. I've changed. I know. I've changed too. Rebecca glanced toward the barn. Can I meet him? Phantom? Lily hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect Phantom from any association with the Caldwell family, from the people who had branded him cursed and given up on him. But another part recognized that Rebecca's request took courage, that she was trying to build a bridge even if she didn't know exactly how. He's still settling in, and he's wary of people, but you can look at him from outside the stall. They walked to the barn together, their boots squelching in the mud, the morning sun now fully risen and casting long shadows across the property. Inside the barn, Phantom was eating his hay, his movements more relaxed than they had been earlier. But when he heard footsteps, his head shot up, ears pinned back, eyes showing white. Easy, Lily said softly, approaching slowly. It's just me, and a visitor. Rebecca stopped several feet from the stall, her eyes widening as she took in the magnificent black stallion. He's beautiful, she whispered. I'd forgotten how beautiful he is. At our ranch, after the accident, everyone avoided him. They kept him in the back paddock, away from the other horses. I only saw him from a distance. He's not just beautiful. He's smart, and scared, and fighting to survive in a world that decided he's not worth the effort. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, watching the horse. He reminds me of you, the way you were after the accident, pushing everyone away, defensive, like you were waiting for the next hurt. Lily was startled by the observation. I didn't realize I was that obvious. You weren't. Not to most people. But I knew you. I could see it even if I didn't know how to help. Rebecca turned to face Lily. What's your plan? How are you going to prove everyone wrong about him? I don't know yet. Right now, I'm just focused on earning his trust. Showing him that not all humans are cruel or unpredictable. The rest will come when we're both ready. The summer festival is in 2 months, Rebecca said thoughtfully. There's always a horse exhibition. Demonstrations, competitions, all of it. If you could show Phantom there, show everyone that he's not cursed, that he can be handled safely, it might change people's minds. It might protect you from my dad's threats. Lily's heart raced at the suggestion. 2 months felt impossibly soon, but Rebecca was right. If she could demonstrate Phantom's progress publicly, it would be harder for Caldwell or anyone else to claim he was a danger that needed to be put down. But could she rebuild a traumatized stallion's trust in that short time? Could she risk exposing him to a crowd, to the noise and chaos of the festival? I'll think about it, Lily said finally. Rebecca nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Here, this is my new number. I changed it last year. Call me if you need anything, or if you just want to talk. I know I don't deserve a second chance at being your friend, but if you're willing to give one, I'd like to try. Lily took the paper, unfolding it to see the numbers written in Rebecca's neat handwriting. Why now? Why not any time in the past 2 years? Because I finally did something brave enough to deserve asking. I stood up to my dad at dinner last night, told him I thought he was wrong about Phantom, that putting him down would be cruel. We fought. He's barely speaking to me this morning. But it felt good to say what I really thought instead of just agreeing with him like I always do. Lily studied her former friend's face and saw genuine change there, the kind that came from uncomfortable growth. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we can try. But it won't be like it was before. Can't be. I don't want it to be like before. Before, I was a follower who never questioned anything. I want to be someone braver than that. Someone more like you. After Rebecca left, Lily returned to Phantom's stall. The stallion was calmer now, his eyes heavy with the drowsiness that comes after a good meal. She sat down in the corner of the stall, her back against the wall, and simply watched him. Phantom watched her back, his ears flicking occasionally, but he didn't move away. They stayed like that for a long time, girl and horse, learning the rhythm of each other's breathing, beginning the slow work of building trust one quiet moment at a time. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt both exhausting and exhilarating. Lily rose before dawn each morning, often before Grace stirred, and made her way to the barn where Phantom waited. The stallion began to anticipate her arrival, his dark eyes watching the barn door, his ears perked forward at the sound of her footsteps. It was a small thing, that expectation, but it meant everything. It meant he was beginning to associate her presence with safety rather than threat. She established rituals. Each morning, she would greet him from outside the stall, speaking softly about nothing in particular, letting him grow accustomed to her voice. Then she would prepare his breakfast, mixing the grain with molasses and sometimes adding chopped apples that Grace brought from the root cellar. Phantom would eat while she cleaned his stall, and gradually he stopped retreating to the far corner when she entered. Instead, he would continue eating, one ear swiveled toward her, monitoring her movements but no longer fearing them. After the stall was clean and Phantom had eaten, Lily would sit in the corner and simply be present. Sometimes, she brought homework, though she rarely accomplished much, too distracted by observing the horse. Other times she brought a book and read aloud, finding that the rhythm of her voice seemed to calm him. She read him adventure stories and poetry, historical accounts and fantasy novels, and though Phantom surely understood nothing of the words, he seemed to appreciate the sound. On the fourth day, he approached her while she sat reading. She felt his presence before she saw him, the displacement of air as his massive body moved closer, the warm breath on her shoulder. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every muscle screaming at her to move, to protect herself, but she forced herself to remain still. Phantom's muzzle touched her hair, his breath stirring the loose strands that had escaped her braid. He inhaled deeply, learning her scent, and then exhaled with a soft snort that ruffled the pages of her book. Lily closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks unbidden. This moment of trust, freely given, felt like a miracle. She didn't move, didn't speak, just let Phantom investigate her at his own pace. His whiskers tickled her neck as he explored, his lips soft against her shoulder. Then, satisfied with his investigation, he returned to his hay, leaving Lily trembling in the corner, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Grace noticed the changes in her granddaughter as much as she noticed the changes in the horse. Lily was eating better, sleeping more soundly despite the early mornings. The shadows under her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by a glow that came from purpose and hope. At dinner each evening, Lily would recount the day's progress, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement, and Grace would listen with a smile that held both joy and relief. But not everyone in Willow Creek shared their optimism. Word spread quickly through the small town about the Donovan girl and the cursed horse. At the feed store, when Grace went to purchase supplies, conversations would halt when she entered. People would offer tight smiles and careful questions that barely masked their judgment. "How's Lily doing with that animal? Hasn't gotten herself hurt yet? You keeping good insurance on that property?" The implied criticism stung, but Grace held her head high. She had lived in this town her entire life, had weathered gossip before, and she refused to let small minds dictate her family's choices. But she worried about the toll it might take on Lily, who was already fragile in ways that weren't always visible. Tommy Brennan appeared on the 5th day, a scrawny 10-year-old with unruly red hair and a gap-toothed grin. He lived on the neighboring property with his single mother, who worked double shifts at the hospital in the next town over. Tommy spent most of his free time wandering the countryside, looking for adventure and company. He had heard about Phantom from kids at school, and curiosity had driven him to investigate. Lily found him peering through the barn door, his eyes huge as he took in the black stallion. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him. "Can I help you?" Tommy jumped, spinning around with his hand over his heart. "You scared me. I'm Tommy, from next door. Well, sort of next door. There's fields between us, but we're neighbors." "I know who you are," Lily said, unable to suppress a small smile at his nervous rambling. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see the horse everyone's talking about. The cursed one. Is it true he killed someone?" "He didn't kill anyone," Lily said firmly. "He injured someone, yes, but it was an accident. He was scared and reacted badly." Tommy crept closer to the stall, his curiosity overwhelming his caution. "He's really big, and so black, like midnight. His name is Phantom. That's a cool name." Tommy turned to Lily with sudden intensity. "Can I help? With him, I mean? I'm good with animals. I saved a baby bird once when it fell out of its nest. And I have a cat at home that was really mean when we got her. But now she sleeps on my bed every night." Lily considered the boy's eager face. She remembered being that age, desperate to be useful, to be included in something important. "Do you know anything about horses?" "Not really," Tommy admitted. "But I can learn. I'm a really fast learner. My teacher says I ask too many questions, but I think that's how you learn stuff, right? By asking questions." Despite herself, Lily found his enthusiasm infectious. "Okay, you can help, but you have to follow my rules exactly. Phantom is still learning to trust people, and we can't do anything that might scare him. Understand?" Tommy nodded so vigorously his whole body shook. "I understand. I'll be super careful. Promise." And he was. Tommy proved to be an earnest helper, arriving each afternoon after school with his backpack still strapped to his shoulders. He would help Lily carry water, spread fresh hay, and clean tack that Grace had unearthed from the barn's storage loft. But more than his physical help, Tommy brought a lightness to the work. He chattered constantly, telling stories about school and his cat and the fantasy novels he devoured, and his presence seemed to ease something in Phantom. The stallion had become accustomed to Lily's quiet intensity, but Tommy's boyish energy was different, less weighted with expectation. One afternoon, Tommy sat in the stall corner eating an apple while Lily brushed Phantom's coat. The stallion had finally allowed her to touch him with the soft brush, though he still tensed at sudden movements. Tommy watched, crunching his apple loudly, completely unaware that he was breaking every rule about eating near a food-motivated horse. Phantom's ears swiveled toward the sound. His nostrils flared, catching the scent of the apple. He turned his massive head toward Tommy, who continued eating obliviously. Lily tensed, ready to intervene, but Phantom simply stretched his neck toward the boy, his expression almost comical in its longing. Tommy looked up and grinned. "Oh, do you want some?" He held out what remained of the apple, about half. Phantom's lips worked delicately, taking the offered fruit with surprising gentleness. Tommy laughed with delight. His lips are so soft, they tickle. From that day forward, Tommy always brought apples. It became their ritual. While Lily worked with Phantom, teaching him to accept the lead rope, to walk beside her without pulling, to stand still while she handled his hooves, Tommy would sit nearby with his homework or a book, occasionally offering apple slices that Phantom would accept with increasing eagerness. But as the weeks passed and the summer festival drew closer, Lily felt the weight of expectation growing. Rebecca had visited twice more, each time bringing news of her father's continued displeasure. Caldwell had filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming Phantom posed a public safety risk. An inspector was scheduled to visit the Donovan farm in 3 weeks. If Phantom showed any signs of aggression, or if the facilities were deemed inadequate, the horse could be seized and destroyed. The news hit Lily like a physical blow. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to prove that Phantom was safe, that he could be handled without incident, that he deserved to live. The festival was in 6 weeks, but if she didn't pass the inspection, they would never make it that far. Grace found her that evening in the barn, sitting in Phantom's stall with her arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming down her face. The stallion stood nearby, his head lowered, as if sensing her distress. "I can't lose him," Lily said when Grace sat down beside her. "I can't. He's finally starting to trust people again. He's getting better. It's not fair." Grace wrapped an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "Life rarely is, sweetheart. But you've accomplished something remarkable in these few weeks. You've given that horse hope when he had none. Whatever happens with the inspection, you've already succeeded in the ways that matter most." "But it's not enough," Lily said bitterly. "Being kind isn't enough. Trying hard isn't enough. They're going to take him away and kill him because people are afraid, because Mr. Caldwell's pride is hurt, because the world is cruel to things it doesn't understand." Grace was quiet for a moment, her hand rubbing slow circles on Lily's back. "You know what I think? I think you're not just fighting for Phantom anymore. You're fighting against everything that happened after your parents died. Every person who looked at you like you were broken. Every friend who didn't know what to say. Every moment you felt like you were cursed too." The words struck home with devastating accuracy. Lily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "What if I can't save him? What if I fail?" "Then you fail knowing you tried, that you fought for something worth fighting for, that you chose love over fear." Grace's voice grew fierce. "But I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to show that inspector a horse who's been transformed by patience and compassion. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another way. We'll fight in court. We'll make so much noise they'll have no choice but to listen." Lily looked up at her grandmother through tear-blurred eyes. "You'd do that? Risk everything? For you? For what's right? In a heartbeat?" Grace cupped Lily's face in her weathered hands. "I already lost my son and daughter-in-law. I watched you nearly drown in grief. If helping you save this horse means you're fighting your way back to life, then there's nothing I wouldn't risk." The next morning, Lily approached Phantom with renewed determination. The inspection was in 3 weeks. The festival was in 6. She needed to accelerate Phantom's training, but carefully, without pushing him so hard that he regressed. She needed to teach him to accept a saddle, to tolerate being led in unfamiliar places, to remain calm around other people and animals. It was ambitious. It was possibly impossible. But Lily had learned over the past weeks that impossible was just another word for not yet accomplished. She started with desensitization work. Using a long rope, she introduced Phantom to objects that might startle him. A flapping tarp, a rolling ball, an umbrella opening and closing. Each time he showed fear, she would stop, let him investigate at his own pace, reward him with treats and gentle words when he approached the frightening object. Tommy helped, his fearlessness and enthusiasm proving invaluable. Where Lily might hesitate, worried about pushing too hard, Tommy would forge ahead with the confidence of someone too young to fully grasp the danger. Phantom began to trust that frightening things wouldn't hurt him if Lily and Tommy were nearby. The tarp became something he would walk over. The umbrella became a toy he would nudge with his nose. The ball became a game, something he would push around the pasture while Tommy laughed and chased after it. But the saddle was different. The saddle represented everything Phantom feared most. Weight on his back, restriction of movement, the memory of the incident that had branded him cursed. When Lily first approached with the old saddle Grace had cleaned and oiled, Phantom's reaction was immediate and violent. He reared, striking out with his front hooves, his eyes rolling white with panic. Lily dropped the saddle and backed away quickly, her heart racing. Tommy, watching from outside the stall, went pale. "Maybe we shouldn't use a saddle. Maybe you can just ride him bareback or something." But Lily knew that wasn't an option. The inspector would expect to see a fully trained horse, one that could be saddled and handled without incident. She picked up the saddle again, but this time she didn't approach Phantom. Instead, she hung it on the stall wall where he could see it, smell it, investigate it from a distance. For 3 days, the saddle simply hung on the wall. Lily went about the normal routine, feeding and grooming and spending time with Phantom, but she made no move toward the saddle. On the 4th day, she took it down and set it on the ground near Phantom's hay. He snorted at it, circled it warily, but eventually returned to eating. Progress came in inches. By the end of the week, Lily could place the saddle on the stall door while she groomed Phantom. By the end of the 2nd week, she could set it near him without triggering panic. On the Monday of the 3rd week, with the inspection scheduled for Friday, Lily knew she had to try. She prepared carefully. Grace stood outside the stall, ready to intervene if needed. Tommy held a bucket of apple slices, prepared to offer distraction and reward. Lily moved slowly, speaking in a constant stream of reassurance. As she lifted the saddle and approached Phantom, the stallion tensed. His nostrils flared, his ears pinned back, but he didn't bolt. Lily placed the saddle gently on his back, barely letting it settle before removing it. Phantom shuddered but held his ground. She repeated the process, on and off, each time leaving it a fraction of a second longer. By the end of the session, Lily could place the saddle on Phantom's back and fasten a single strap before his anxiety forced her to remove it. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough for the inspection. But it was progress, and progress was all they had. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, matching Lily's mood. The inspector was due at 10 o'clock. Lily had risen at 4, unable to sleep, and had spent the intervening hours grooming Phantom until his coat gleamed like polished obsidian. She had braided his mane and tail, cleaned every inch of the barn, raked the yard, and done everything possible to present a picture of responsible horse ownership. Grace had dressed in her best clothes, the ones she reserved for church. Tommy had begged his mother to let him stay home from school, but she had refused, leaving him nearly in tears at the bus stop. Rebecca had called the night before to wish them luck, her voice tight with anxiety. The inspector arrived precisely. At 10 in a county vehicle, a clipboard already in hand. He was a middle-aged man with a graying mustache and the expression of someone who had seen too many cases of animal neglect and abuse. His name was Mr. Patterson, and his handshake was perfunctory. "Show me the animal," he said without preamble. Lily led him to the barn, Grace following close behind. Her hands trembled as she opened the barn door, revealing Phantom in his stall. The stallion stood alert, his ears pricked forward, his body tense but not panicked at the sight of a stranger. Mr. Patterson walked slowly around the stall, making notes on his clipboard. "Tell me about his history." Lily recounted what she knew: the incident at Caldwell Ranch, the injury to Jimmy Haskell, the horse being labeled cursed and abandoned, her decision to purchase him at auction, the weeks of careful trust-building that had followed. "Has he shown any aggressive behavior since you acquired him?" Mr. Patterson's pen hovered over the clipboard. "No, sir. He was frightened at first, defensive, but he's never tried to hurt me or anyone else. I'll need to see him handled, out of the stall, led around the property. Can you do that safely?" Lily's mouth went dry. This was the moment everything hinged on. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and opened the stall door. Phantom watched her intently as she clipped the lead rope to his halter. She took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to any gods that might be listening, and led Phantom out of the stall. The stallion emerged into the wider barn, his hooves echoing on the wooden floor. His head was high, his body radiating tension, but he walked beside Lily without pulling or rearing. She led him out into the yard, where the morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting everything in golden light. Mr. Patterson watched with sharp eyes as Lily walked Phantom in a wide circle. The horse moved stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the stranger's scrutiny, but he responded to Lily's gentle guidance. When she asked him to stop, he stopped, When she asked him to walk, he walked. Now show me you can handle his hooves. This was more challenging. Lily had been working on hoof handling, but Phantom still sometimes pulled away, unnerved by having his legs lifted. She took her time, speaking softly to him, running her hand down his leg before asking him to lift it. The first 3 hooves went reasonably well. The fourth, his injured hind leg, was more difficult. Phantom shifted his weight, uncomfortable, but after several tries, he allowed Lily to lift it briefly. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what a fully trained horse would demonstrate. But it showed progress, cooperation, trust. Mr. Patterson made more notes. "The saddle," he said. "Put the saddle on him." Lily's heart sank. This was what she had feared most. She retrieved the saddle from the barn, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Phantom's eyes widened as he saw it, his nostrils flaring. Every muscle in his body went rigid. "Easy, boy," Lily whispered. "We've done this before. Remember? Just like we practiced." She approached slowly, letting Phantom see the saddle, smell it, remember that it hadn't hurt him before. She placed it gently on his back. Phantom trembled, his tail swishing anxiously, but he didn't bolt. Lily fastened the first strap, then the second, working as quickly as she dared while keeping her movements smooth and calm. The saddle was on. Phantom stood with it, every line of his body screaming discomfort, but he stood. Lily felt tears burning in her eyes. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a brave, good boy." Mr. Patterson approached, his expression unreadable. He walked around Phantom, observing from every angle. The stallion's ears pinned back at the stranger's proximity, and for a heart-stopping moment, Lily thought he might panic. But then Grace stepped forward, her voice carrying calm authority. "He's come further in 3 weeks than most horses come in 3 months, Grace said. "My granddaughter has worked with him every single day, showing him patience and kindness he's never known before. He's not perfect, he's not finished, but he's proof that trauma can heal when given the chance." Mr. Patterson looked from Grace to Lily to Phantom, his pen tapping against the clipboard. The silence stretched so long that Lily wanted to scream. Finally, he signed something at the bottom of the page and looked up. "The facilities are adequate. The horse shows clear signs of ongoing training and rehabilitation. While I have concerns about his history and the potential for regression, I'm satisfied that he's not an immediate danger to public safety." He paused, letting the words sink in. "However, I'm recommending regular follow-up inspections every 2 months for the next year. If at any point he shows aggressive behavior or if his care deteriorates, this decision can be revisited." Lily's knees went weak with relief. Grace caught her arm, steadying her. "Thank you," Lily managed. "Thank you so much." Mr. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of animals that needed to be removed from bad situations. But I've also learned to recognize when something special is happening. What you're doing here, it's special. Don't prove me wrong." After he left, Lily stood in the yard holding Phantom's lead rope, unable to quite believe they had passed. The stallion lowered his head, resting his forehead against her shoulder, and Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed. They had 3 more weeks until the festival. 3 weeks to prepare for the moment when they would step into the arena in front of the entire town and demonstrate that the cursed horse was not cursed at all. 3 weeks to transform Phantom from a survivor into a symbol of hope. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to stand in the sunlight with her arms around a black stallion who had finally learned that gentle hands existed in the world. It was enough to feel Grace's pride radiating beside her. It was enough to know that sometimes, when you fought for what mattered, you won. The summer festival arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt orchestrated by fate itself. Clear blue skies, warm sunshine tempered by a gentle breeze. The kind of day that brought everyone in Willow Creek and the surrounding counties out to celebrate. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity, vendors selling everything from handmade crafts to kettle corn, children shrieking with laughter on carnival rides, and the constant backdrop of country music playing over loudspeakers. Lily arrived early with Grace and Tommy, Phantom loaded carefully in the borrowed trailer. The horse exhibition was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, giving them time to settle Phantom in one of the temporary stalls set up for participating horses. As Lily led him down the ramp, she could feel the eyes of other handlers on them, could hear the whispers starting immediately. That's the Donovan girl, with the cursed horse. Can't believe they let her bring him here. Someone's going to get hurt. Lily kept her head high and her attention on Phantom. The stallion was tense, his eyes wide as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings, the noise, the crowd. But he trusted Lily now. When she asked him to walk, he walked. When she asked him to stop, he stopped. His faith in her was absolute, and she was determined not to betray it. Rebecca appeared as they were settling Phantom into his stall. She wore riding clothes, her blonde hair in a perfect braid, a ribbon pinned to her shirt. "I'm competing in the barrel racing," she explained. "But I wanted to check on you first. How's he doing?" "Nervous, but okay." Lily stroked Phantom's neck, feeling the tremor in his muscles. "How's your dad?" Rebecca's expression tightened, furious that Patterson passed the inspection. "He's here today in the stands. He told me he expects Phantom to prove him right, to show everyone he's dangerous." She paused. "I told him I expected him to be disappointed." The hours before the exhibition passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Tommy appointed himself Phantom's official guardian, sitting outside the stall and warning away anyone who got too close. Grace made sure Lily ate something, forcing a sandwich into her hands that Lily could barely taste. Other competitors came by to look at Phantom, some with curiosity, others with undisguised skepticism. At 1:30, the announcer called for all exhibition participants to report to the main arena. Lily's hands shook as she saddled Phantom. The stallion stood quietly, accepting the weight on his back, though his ears swiveled constantly, monitoring the noise from the arena. Lily checked and rechecked every strap, every buckle, knowing that any mistake could be catastrophic. "You ready?" Grace asked softly. Lily looked at her grandmother, at Tommy's anxious face, at Rebecca who had abandoned her own preparations to be there for support. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The main arena was a large oval of groomed sand, surrounded by wooden rails and backed by bleachers packed with spectators. Lily could see Caldwell in the front row, his arms crossed, his expression stony. Around him sat half the town, all of them there to watch the girl who had dared to challenge the curse. The exhibition format was simple. Each handler would demonstrate their horses training through a series of exercises judged on obedience, trust, and partnership. There would be walking and trotting patterns, obstacle navigation, and a final demonstration of the handler's choice. Lily had planned carefully for this moment, choreographing every move with Phantom over the past 3 weeks. But as she led Phantom through the gate and into the arena, all her careful planning evaporated in the face of sensory overload. The crowd noise, the bright sun, the flapping flags around the perimeter, it was too much. Phantom balked at the entrance, his eyes rolling white, his muscles bunching under her hand. "Easy," Lily whispered, though her own heart was hammering. "I'm right here. You're safe." She didn't force him. She simply stood at the entrance, one hand on his neck, speaking softly, letting him process the overwhelming environment. The crowd murmured, impatient, confused by the delay. Caldwell leaned forward, a satisfied smirk beginning to form. But then something remarkable happened. Tommy's voice rose from the rail where he stood with Grace. "You've got this, Lily. Phantom's the bravest horse here." The simple encouragement seemed to break the spell. Phantom's ears flicked toward the familiar voice. He looked at Lily, and she looked back at him, and in that moment, they made a choice together. They stepped into the arena. The crowd fell quiet as Lily began the demonstration. She didn't mount Phantom, had never planned to. That would come later, when his healing was more complete. Instead, she showed something more powerful. She showed partnership. She led him through the walking pattern with no lead rope, just her hand resting lightly on his neck. She guided him through the obstacles not with force but with gentle direction and trust. When she asked him to stop, He stopped so precisely that his hooves left marks in the exact spots she indicated. For the final demonstration, Lily did something no one expected. She stepped away from Phantom completely, walking to the center of the arena and leaving him standing alone at the rail. The crowd gasped. This was madness, leaving a supposedly dangerous horse unrestrained in a crowded arena. But Lily knew what she was doing. She had practiced this moment 100 times in the quiet of the Donovan pasture. She turned to face Phantom, 20 feet of sand between them, and she simply opened her arms. "Phantom," she called clearly. "Come." The black stallion stood for a heartbeat. His ears pricked forward, his white star brilliant in the afternoon sun. Then he moved, not running, not panicked, but with deliberate, measured steps. He walked across the arena to where Lily stood, and when he reached her, he lowered his great head and rested his forehead against her chest. The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lily wrapped her arms around Phantom's neck, tears streaming down her face, and whispered words only he could hear. "You did it. You showed them who you really are." When she finally stepped back and looked up at the stands, she saw faces transformed. Where there had been skepticism and fear, there was now wonder. Mothers dabbed at their eyes. Fathers cleared their throats. Children leaned forward, awed by what they had witnessed. Caldwell sat rigid in his seat, his face flushed, his mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked like a man watching his certainties crumble, and for the first time, Lily felt not anger toward him but pity. How small his world must be, she thought, to have no room for second chances. The judges awarded Lily first place, though she barely registered the ribbon being pinned to Phantom's bridle. What mattered was the way people approached her afterward, wanting to touch Phantom, to hear his story, to understand how the cursed horse had been transformed. What mattered was Tommy's fierce hug and Grace's proud tears and Rebecca's whispered, "I knew you could do it." That evening, as the sun set over the fairgrounds and the crowds dispersed, Lily led Phantom back to the trailer. The stallion walked beside her calmly, no longer spooked by the festival noise, his confidence restored by the day's success. As she loaded him, Rebecca appeared one last time. "My dad left early," she said. "But before he did, I heard him talking to someone. He said he'd been wrong about Phantom. Said he'd let pride blind him to what was possible." She smiled. "That's as close to an apology as you'll get from him, but I think it counts for something." Lily nodded, feeling the weight of the day settling into her bones. "It counts for a lot. It means people can change their minds, can choose to see differently." The drive home was quiet, all of them exhausted. But it was a satisfied exhaustion, the kind that comes from hard work rewarded. When they pulled into the Donovan driveway, the familiar sight of the red barn and the small farmhouse felt like a homecoming more profound than any Lily had experienced since moving in with Grace 2 years earlier. As she settled Phantom in his stall for the night, the stallion nuzzled her pocket, looking for the apple slices he had learned would be there. Lily laughed and produced them, watching as he crunched contentedly. His transformation was not complete. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when old fears resurfaced, times when progress felt impossible. But they had proven something today that no one could take away. They had proven that broken things could heal, that cursed things could be blessed, that with patience and love and stubborn determination, even the most damaged heart could learn to trust again. Grace appeared in the barn doorway, her silhouette framed by the last light of day. "You coming in? I made your favorite for dinner. We're celebrating." Lily took one last look at Phantom, who was already drowsing in his stall. His head lowered, his body finally at peace. "I'll be right there." But she lingered a moment longer, her hand resting on the stall door, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the girl she had been at the auction, grieving and lost and looking for something to believe in. She thought about the terrified stallion in the corner pen, abandoned by everyone who should have cared for him. They had saved each other, she realized, not through grand gestures or miraculous interventions, but through the quiet accumulation of days spent showing up, putting in the work, choosing hope over despair again and again until hope became the only truth that mattered. As Lily walked to the house, where warm lights spilled from the windows and Grace waited with dinner and stories to share, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. She felt whole. Not perfectly healed, not without scars, but whole in the way that matters most, whole enough to keep going, whole enough to believe that tomorrow would be better than today. Behind her in the barn, Phantom lifted his head and nickered softly, a sound of contentment. And in that moment, under the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, everything was exactly as it should be. The weeks following the summer festival brought changes to Willow Creek that rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. Lily found herself at the center of attention she had neither sought nor expected. People who had crossed the street to avoid her after her parents' death now stopped to ask about Phantom, to share their own stories of loss and recovery, to tell her that what she had done mattered to them in ways they struggled to articulate. The local newspaper ran a feature story with the headline, "From Cursed to Celebrated. Teens Bond with Troubled Horse Inspires Community." The article included photos of Lily and Phantom at the festival, that moment when the black stallion had walked across the arena to rest his head against her chest. She kept a copy folded in her nightstand drawer, not out of pride but as a reminder that perception could shift, that stories could be rewritten, that endings were sometimes just beginnings in disguise. School started again in late August, and Lily braced herself for the social complications that would surely follow. But something fundamental had changed. Where before she had been the grief-stricken girl to be pitted or avoided, now she was the girl who had accomplished something remarkable. Classmates who had whispered behind her back now invited her to sit with them at lunch. Teachers who had handled her with kid gloves now engaged her as they would any student. Rebecca had become a constant presence again, though their renewed friendship looked different from what it had been in childhood. They were both older now, shaped by different experiences, but there was a foundation of understanding between them that hadn't existed before. Rebecca had learned to stand up to her father's expectations, while Lily had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, just choosing not to let past hurt dictate the future. One September afternoon, they sat together on the fence rail watching Phantom graze in the pasture. The stallion had filled out over the summer, his coat gleaming with health, his movements no longer carrying the tension of constant vigilance. He looked like a different horse from the trembling, furious creature in the auction pen. "I've been thinking about college," Rebecca said suddenly. "Somewhere far from here. Maybe studying veterinary medicine or animal behavior. Something that matters, you know?" Lily glanced at her friend, recognizing the yearning for purpose in her voice. "What does your dad say about that?" "He wants me to stay local, take business courses, eventually help run the ranch." Rebecca picked at the peeling paint on the fence rail. "But I don't want to just do what's expected anymore. Watching you fight for Phantom, it made me realize I've been living my whole life trying to please other people. I want to figure out what I actually want." "That's scary," Lily said, speaking from experience. "Choosing your own path when everyone has different plans for you." "Terrifying," Rebecca agreed. "But also kind of exciting? Like, what if I'm capable of more than I think? What if everyone is?" The question hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. Lily thought about the past months, about how she had surprised herself with what she was capable of when pushed beyond her comfort zone. She had always thought of herself as someone things happened to, not someone who made things happen. But Phantom had changed that. He had forced her to become active rather than passive, to fight rather than surrender. Tommy arrived on his bicycle, his red hair wild from the ride, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He had become a permanent fixture at the Donovan farm, spending every afternoon after school helping with Phantom and the other animals Grace had begun acquiring. Word had spread about the healing happening on the small farm, and people started bringing them their own troubled creatures. A dog with separation anxiety, a goat that had been abused, a rabbit missing an eye. Grace and Lily took them all in, and Tommy appointed himself their caretaker and advocate. "Guess what I learned in science class today?" Tommy announced, dropping his bike and scrambling up the fence to sit between Lily and Rebecca. "Did you know that when bones break and heal, they're actually stronger at the break point than they were before?" Like, the body reinforces the injury so it's less likely to break there again. Lily smiled at his enthusiasm. I didn't know that. It's true. Mr. Henderson showed us x-rays and everything. And I was thinking, maybe that's what happened with Phantom. Maybe being broken made him stronger. Made both of you stronger. The observation, delivered with the unself-conscious wisdom of childhood, struck Lily as profoundly true. She had been broken by her parents' death, shattered in ways that had seemed irreparable. But in the process of healing, of learning to live with the grief rather than being consumed by it, she had developed strength she never knew she possessed. Phantom had done the same. The trauma that had nearly destroyed him had also taught him resilience, had shown him that he could survive the unsurvivable. You're pretty smart for a 10-year-old, Rebecca said, ruffling Tommy's hair. I'm almost 11, Tommy corrected with dignity. And I read a lot. Reading makes you smart. As autumn deepened and the leaves turned gold and crimson across the Oregon hills, Lily settled into a new rhythm of life. School occupied her mornings and early afternoons. Then she would return home to work with Phantom and the growing menagerie of rescue animals. Grace had begun offering the farm as a therapeutic space for people dealing with their own trauma, a place where they could interact with animals who understood what it meant to heal from deep wounds. A woman who had survived domestic violence came twice a week to brush Phantom, finding peace in his gentle acceptance. A veteran with PTSD spent hours sitting in the pasture with the anxious dog, both of them learning to breathe through their triggers. A child who had stopped speaking after witnessing violence began to talk again, whispering secrets to the one-eyed rabbit that no one else could hear. The farm became a sanctuary not just for damaged animals but for damaged people, and Lily found herself at the center of it, helping facilitate connections between species, between pain and healing, between past trauma and future hope. It was exhausting work, emotionally draining in ways she hadn't anticipated, but it was also profoundly meaningful. She was making a difference in ways that mattered. Caldwell never apologized directly, but his actions spoke louder than words. In October, he donated funds to help Grace expand the barn and build proper facilities for the rescue animals. He showed up one Saturday with a crew of his ranch hands and spent the day building new stalls and reinforcing fences. He worked alongside Lily without speaking much, but when he left, he paused by his truck. The world needs more people like you, he said gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes. People who don't give up on things just because they're difficult. He cleared his throat. Jimmy Haskell, the boy Phantom injured, he's been following your story. He asked if he could visit sometime. Work through his fear. I told him I'd ask you. Lily's heart swelled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Tell him he's welcome anytime. We'll take it slow. Caldwell nodded and drove away, leaving Lily standing in the driveway feeling like another piece of the past had finally settled into place. Jimmy came the following week, walking with a slight limp that would probably never fully disappear. His nervousness palpable as Grace led him to the pasture where Phantom grazed. Lily waited with the stallion, one hand resting on his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. He's different, Jimmy said softly, stopping several yards away. He looks so calm. He is different, Lily agreed. But then, so are you probably. What happened changed both of you. Jimmy moved closer, cautiously, his eyes never leaving Phantom. The stallion raised his head, ears swiveling toward this person who carried the scent of old fear and pain. For a moment, Lily worried that Phantom might react badly, might recognize some element of the trauma they shared. But the stallion simply watched, patient and still, as Jimmy approached. I've been scared of horses ever since, Jimmy admitted, his voice shaking. Even pictures of them make my heart race. My therapist said confronting the fear might help, but I didn't know if I could do it. Fear is just information, Lily said, something Grace had told her once. It tells you to be careful, to pay attention. It doesn't have to control you. Jimmy took another step, then another until he stood close enough to reach out if he chose. Phantom lowered his head, a gesture of submission and peace that Lily had worked with him to perfect. The stallion's dark eyes were gentle, almost apologetic, as if he understood the pain he had caused and wished he could undo it. Can I touch him? Jimmy's voice was barely audible. Only if you want to. No pressure either way. Jimmy's hand trembled as he extended it, his fingers stretching toward Phantom's muzzle. The moment of contact was electric, charged with the weight of shared history and mutual healing. Phantom stood perfectly still, letting Jimmy rest his shaking hand against the soft velvet of his nose. Tears streamed down Jimmy's face, and Lily felt her own eyes burning. I forgive you, Jimmy whispered to the horse. And I think maybe I can start forgiving myself too, for being scared, for letting it control my life. The three of them stood together in the autumn sunlight, boy and girl and horse, each carrying scars that would never fully disappear, but learning that scars were not the same as brokenness. They were simply evidence of survival, of having endured something difficult and emerged on the other side. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the hills and transformed the farm into something from a storybook. Lily turned 17 in December, celebrating with Grace, Tommy, Rebecca, and surprisingly, Jimmy, who had become a regular visitor. They gathered in the warm farmhouse kitchen, eating cake and laughing at Tommy's terrible jokes, while outside Phantom stood in his shelter, protected from the weather but visible through the window, a dark sentinel watching over his unconventional family. The local community college reached out in January with an unusual proposal. They wanted to develop a program based on what was happening at the Donovan farm, an equine therapy certificate that would train people to work with troubled animals and troubled people. They wanted Lily and Grace to help design the curriculum, to share what they had learned through trial and error and stubborn determination. Grace was hesitant at first, worried about the time commitment and whether they were qualified to teach others. But Lily felt a pull toward the opportunity that was hard to ignore. What they had discovered here, the healing power of connection between damaged creatures, it deserved to be shared more widely. It deserved to become something bigger than one small farm in Oregon. We don't have all the answers, Lily said as they discussed the proposal over dinner. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we can teach people to figure it out as they go, the way we did. Grace smiled, her weathered face creasing with pride. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, and a better partner. Lily glanced out the window toward the barn where Phantom rested. He taught me that healing isn't about becoming who you were before the trauma. It's about becoming someone new, someone who carries the scars but isn't defined by them. They agreed to help with the program, dedicating one weekend a month to teaching workshops. The first session in February brought 15 students, ranging from college age to retirement, all of them drawn by the story of the cursed horse and the girl who had refused to give up on him. Lily stood before them feeling inadequate and terrified, but when she began to speak, the words flowed naturally. She told them about patience and persistence, about reading an animal's body language and respecting their boundaries, about the slow accumulation of trust built through consistent, gentle presence, about failing and trying again and refusing to let setbacks become endings. But mostly, she told them about love, the kind that shows up every day regardless of progress or reward, the kind that believes in potential even when evidence suggests otherwise. The students worked with Phantom and the other rescue animals, learning through direct experience what no textbook could teach. They learned that healing was not linear, that progress could be followed by regression, that some wounds never fully closed but could be managed with care and attention. They learned that the most profound transformations often happened in silence, in moments so small they could be missed if you weren't paying attention. By spring, the program had a waiting list, and other farms were reaching out to learn how to replicate the model. Lily found herself becoming a spokesperson for a movement she had never intended to start, speaking at conferences and workshops about trauma-informed animal care. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and sometimes more than she felt capable of handling. But every time doubt crept in, she would return to the barn, to Phantom, and remember why it mattered. Rebecca left for college in September, heading to UC Davis to study animal science. The night before she left, she and Lily sat in the hayloft like they had as children, their legs dangling over the edge, the smell of summer hay surrounding them. I'm scared, Rebecca admitted. What if I fail? What if I get there and realize I'm not smart enough or strong enough or good enough? Then you'll figure it out, Lily said with certainty. The same way you figured out how to stand up to your dad. The same way I figured out how to help Phantom. We're all just making it up as we go. Rebecca. The only real failure is not trying. Rebecca leaned her head on Lily's shoulder. When did we get so old? We're not old. We're just not kids anymore. Promise you'll keep me updated on everything. The farm, the program, Phantom, all of it. I promise. And you have to promise to tell me about college. About everything you're learning and experiencing. Don't disappear on me again. Never again, Rebecca vowed. I learned that lesson. The year Lily turned 18 brought changes that felt both monumental and natural. She graduated high school with honors and was accepted to Oregon State to study psychology with a focus on trauma and recovery. But she deferred for a year, wanting to dedicate more time to the farm and the growing therapy program. Grace's health had begun to decline. Nothing serious but enough to remind them both that time was precious and shouldn't be wasted. Phantom was now fully trained, gentle enough that children could ride him under supervision, responsive to the subtlest cues from experienced handlers. But he remained Lily's horse in the ways that mattered most. Every morning, before the students arrived and the day's work began, she would spend an hour with him in the pasture, just being together, the way they had in those early days when trust was still a fragile, precious thing. One morning in late October, as frost painted the grass silver and their breath made clouds in the cold air, Lily stood with Phantom on the hill overlooking the valley. It was the same view she had gazed upon countless times, but it looked different now. The Donovan farm had expanded, new buildings dotting the landscape. The pastures held not just Phantom but a dozen other rescue animals. The driveway saw constant traffic as students and clients and volunteers came and went. But more than the physical changes, Lily felt different. The girl who had stood at an auction barn and impulsively bid on a horse everyone else had given up on seemed like someone from another lifetime. That girl had been broken, drowning in grief, desperately seeking something to believe in. This woman, standing here now with the morning sun painting everything gold. She was whole. Not undamaged, not unmarked by pain, but whole in the way that mattered. Whole enough to help others heal. Whole enough to believe in the future. Phantom nudged her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck, and Lily wrapped her arms around him one more time. We did it, she whispered. Everyone said you were cursed, that you were dangerous, that you should be put down. But look at you now. Look at us. The stallion's dark eyes held intelligence and peace. The wildness that had once defined him transformed into strength. He had not forgotten his trauma, would probably carry those scars forever, but he had learned to live beyond them. He had learned that the world held gentleness as well as cruelty, that trust was possible even after betrayal, that endings could become beginnings if someone cared enough to write a new story. In the distance, Lily could see Grace moving slowly across the yard, Tommy's bicycle leaning against the porch, the first students of the day pulling into the drive. Life was calling, with all its demands and possibilities. But for this moment, Lily stood still, absorbing the miracle of where she was and how she had gotten here. She thought about her parents, whose deaths had shattered her world, and wondered what they would think of who she had become. Would they be proud? Would they recognize their daughter in this young woman who had learned to transform pain into purpose? She liked to think they would, that somewhere they were watching and knowing that even in their absence, she had found her way. Come on, boy, Lily said finally, starting down the hill with Phantom walking calmly beside her. No lead rope needed anymore, just the bond between them guiding the way. We've got work to do, people to help, lives to change. As they walked, the sun broke fully over the mountains, casting everything in brilliant light. The cursed horse and the grieving girl were gone, replaced by partners in healing, by teacher and student, by symbols of what was possible when someone refused to accept that broken meant beyond repair. The farm came alive around them as they descended, the sounds of animals and people blending into the symphony of a place dedicated to second chances. And Lily, walking beside the black stallion who had saved her as much as she had saved him, felt something she had thought lost forever in that car accident 2 years ago. She felt joy, pure, uncomplicated joy in being alive, in having purpose, in knowing that her story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.